Everyone, welcome back to another exciting adventure in podcasting. This is Words, Images, and Worlds, and I'm also saying welcome back to my guest, Tyler Page. Tyler, thank you for being willing to come on for a second time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
A pleasure, a pleasure. The last time we talked, we were focusing on the book that is kind of over
Oh,
your head there behind you.
yep.
Yes, Button Pusher. We were talking about that. I love that book. And I'm
Thanks.
always, absolutely, I'm always trying to keep up with what is on the horizon with comics, graphic novels, and books in general. And I was so excited to see a new book from you on the way.
Thank you. I'm excited to have a new book on its way.
Absolutely. So curious by means of a first question to get us talking about that book. What is new for you creatively?
Uh, so the new book that's coming out next March, it's called Extra Large.
Hmm.
And it's with big projects like this, it's always funny to say what's new because I turned it in a year and a half ago and have kind of
Right.
like mentally moved on to other things. That was the second really big kind of production project after Button Pusher as well, and after completing both of those, I've kind of like turned back to doing some more little personal things, but.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think with extra large, kind of what's new with that compared to button pusher is I feel like I took all of the things that I learned, making button pusher, whether they were positives or negatives, and turned around and put those into extra large.
Hmm.
I think the storytelling is a little bit tighter, more economical. It's a little bit more of a focused story, um, which made it a little bit more fun to work on. I think. Button Pusher was a more personal project for a lot of reasons, and I was, looking to hit a lot of very specific things with that book. So it was the process of making it was a little bit more like anxiety inducing, I guess.
Hmm.
Whereas with Extra Large, it was, it's a fun book, but it's also a serious book. There's a lot of lighthearted moments in it. There's a lot of serious stuff in it, but it was still, I think, a little bit easier to make for those reasons. Yeah. I think one of the biggest ones was with Button Pusher. I had a coloring assistant on that to kind of help um, take the groundwork that I laid and then kind of tweak things and elevate it because coloring really isn't my main forte. It's one of those things that like I can do when I have to and out of necessity, but it doesn't come intuitively
Hmm.
to me like it
Hmm.
does for some people. Um, and I learned a lot of lessons from that, so I was able to. I did all of the coloring on extra large, which on one hand felt like a really cool accomplishment, but like as soon as I was done with it, I was like, I'm not doing that again. At least not by myself. That was the part of the book for me that was maybe the least fun and kind of like the biggest slog
Yeah.
versus the when you get down to the fun drawing part of it. So yeah.
Yeah. No, you were talking about how I mentioned it's a new project, but you finished and turned it in some time ago. I don't know that everybody that tunes in realizes kind of the long process that a graphic
hmm
novel goes through of writing, drawing, developing, and then the path to publishing. It's not a one and done.
Yeah, especially if you're working with, one of the, larger publishers. I think that there are projects that, the stars align and things come together and they might be out 2 years after you sign a contract. I think this was, which by the time it comes out, it'll have been maybe about 4 years, almost five from start to finish. Um, but yeah, that's a good point because for most graphic novels, you're starting with a rough idea, a seed, a concept. If
Hmm.
you're working with an agent, your agent has to say, okay, that's a good idea, let's develop it. You develop that into a pitch. You get that all together. That could take a month, it could take 6 months, it could take a year, depending on if you're able to find the story quickly enough, and then your agent has to sell the book, someone has to buy it. Um, you go through a whole editorial process there. And then, of course, outside of that, there's all of the kind of mechanical stuff in publishing where it's like, okay, we bought this book from you. We're going to publish it. We're going to put it in the fall 2022 season. And then 3 months later, it's like, hey, you know what? We've got a gap in this next season. We think the book would do better here. There's a
Mhm.
lot of, all that strategy on the publishing side. Um, and because I think initially Extra Large was slated for this fall of 2024, and then they pushed it back to spring, which from what I've been able to learn tends to be a better selling window, just because when books come out in the fall, they kind of get pushed up against back to school, and then all of a sudden it's the
Yeah.
holidays, and then everyone just kind of forgets everything. Versus when they come out in the spring, you kind of have all year to sort of let them breathe and kind of
Mhm.
reintroduce things in the fall. So there's so many different sides to all of this, and I think everyone kind of handles it differently. And for those people who have an agent, that's partially what your agent's for, but also your editor and the people, the editorial team that you're working with. But yeah, it can take a long time.
Oh, I'm picturing a like a just gigantic flow chart of all of those things that you were just mentioning.
There's a part of me that wonders that there are hopes, at least, that one of that exists somewhere, at least on the editorial side of things, because that's another one of those things. I was just at a show here in town this past weekend, talking with a couple of other cartoonists, how you work on things, you turn them in, and then you don't hear from your editor for a month, 3 months, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, can I get this changed tomorrow morning?" Or "I need
Right.
this fixed by Friday or whatever," and it's just like totally out of the blue. So some of those things happen. Um, and yeah, even though I like turned in the completed book, like we're just now, I think within the last month, like we wrapped up finalizing cover design. So it's kind of all done in parts. It's like since the interior pages in the story are the bulk of the work, that all gets done first, and cover stuff kind of comes at the end. So
Oh, well, you were talking about that seed. I'm curious about the inspiration behind extra large.
sure. I mean, so because people are already asking, oh, is this a sequel to Button Pusher? Is it what? Because when an author comes out with another book, people kind of assume that it might be related to the last thing that you did. And it's kind of the term that people have come up with is an in between quill. So it kind of
Oh.
like, since Button Pusher is a memoir, follows my life more or less, my childhood. Um, the story of Extra Large, the things that take place there, kind of take place right in the middle or towards the end of the story that was Button Pusher. And in Button Pusher, towards the end of that story, I spent a little bit of time talking about some of the challenges I had with my weight and body image, and that was the seed for Extra Large. So it was like, oh, once I'd finished Button Pusher, it was what's next, and I started to think about, what are the 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of like big things in my life, main things that I've had to deal with, struggle with, talk about, carry with me through the years. And that issue of struggling with my weight and body image and things like that was one of those things. And I could see that was, like you said, that was a seed.
Mhm.
Um, and I kind of pitched that as a concept to my agent. She was like, "Yeah, let's run with that." And I kind of just started brainstorming. You sit down, you think about what's happened in your life related to those things, and just eventually you collect a bunch of vignettes and scenes, and then try to figure out how to knit those together. And um, it grew into, it starts with kind of like one simple idea and then grows into something a little bit more complex. So it's um, Extra Large ends up being a story it's about bullying, because there's teasing, and
Mhm.
especially in grade school, that's just, I know it's maybe a little bit different now than it was when I was a kid in the 80s. Maybe it was a simpler time back then. People were more crude or basic with their insults and teasing or whatever. But it kind of started with that, and then also focuses on, as someone who was teased, and had struggles with their weight, also kind of transferred into discussions of like issues of gendered expectations, like
Hmm.
what does it mean, like what is masculinity, what is it to be a man. One of the things that I used for that in the book was as a kid in the 80s, I was a big fan of like He-Man and shows like that, and looking at in the way that we've talked about women and girls, we're showing these images of like Barbie and so on and so forth. Boys, we're seeing a lot of the same thing in terms of these, big muscular dudes, and how did that make us feel
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
this thing that we were supposed to kind of like live up to and aspire to. Um, and the other thing that really interested me once I started thinking about it was also as someone who was bullied, but then turning right back around and bullying other kids or teasing other
Right.
kids. And
Right.
it's just kind of that like, it's the schoolyard, it's the free for all, it's the like, attack or be attacked kind of mindset, or the mindset of like um, the tagline that we came up for the book was everyone wants to fit in. So it plays on the issue of whether clothes fit you, but also that you want to be part of a social group. And
Hmm.
often the easiest way to be part of a social group was to just join in against somebody else, even if you were also maybe at other times in the day the person who was getting picked on. It was, maybe not a conscious choice at that age, because you're maybe not, not that self-aware when you're 10, 11, 12, whatever. But that was something that I always thought was kind of interesting, and wanted to explore. I ended up making my character in Extra Life a little bit more self-aware than I was at that age, where
Hmm.
he does have some insights about that when he's teasing people and can't figure out why they're upset or mad, and then that gets turned back on him, and it's eventually kind of like, oh, like that's what that feels like. That's not fun.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That goes a little bit to the question of what you hope readers take from it. I know that when I was reading Button Pusher, there was a whole side of me that was reading it, kind of reflecting on my adolescence, but then also as a teacher, I was reading it and thinking about, the kind of space I create as a teacher, and
Hmm.
the way that art can play such a role in people's lives. So curious about something you hope that readers notice or take away.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's tricky, and there were a lot of discussions on the editorial side about a book about weight issues, body image, since those issues and the discussions around them socially have changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. I wanted to try not to be prescriptive and
Hmm.
say, this is what I think or this is what you should do. And I really went into it. I mean, I kind of did this with Button Pusher too. I went into it just thinking like, these are experiences that I went through that were hard, harmful, things I learned from, and maybe you can read them and know that there's a sense of kinship of like someone else has gone through this and they're okay, or these are the things that they learned, and see that it's not the end of the world that your friends were teasing you at lunch, or that the girl that sits next to you in geometry class doesn't like you,
Hmm.
um, things like that. So I at least my conscious thinking of it was to try and keep it simple from that perspective, and just present a like, here are some things that happened, and maybe you'll identify with those things as well.
Yeah, yeah, very well said, very well said, and very thoughtful. It sounds like on your part of the process and working with the publisher as well.
Yeah, it's, I think that there are certain books where you can be prescriptive, or maybe you've built up a quote brand as an author or creator with a certain mindset. And I'm not ready to kind of commit to that or deal with maybe some of the, it's like once you pick one position, it's like then that's your position,
Hmm.
that is set
Hmm.
in stone. And I don't think that, especially um, when it comes to art in general, but when it comes to books specifically, I feel like that's books are one of the books and writing and stories are one of the few ways that we can really like know what it's like to be another person.
Yeah.
Because it's me, it's you, it's another writer sitting down and trying to communicate as directly as they can about their own experiences onto the page. Um, and just, for lack of a better metaphor, just like spilling that out and saying, here, this is what it was like to be me. Here is, in this case, here is what it was like to be, a kid in middle school in the 80s. And maybe middle school is still a lot like that, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, well, switching directions just a little bit, I'm a big fan of the graphic novel and visual storytelling. So curious about what inspires you, what excites you about art and telling stories in that way.
I mean, the obvious one is just, the drawing part of it. That's been I don't know, tool is not the right word, but that's just been a thing that I've done my whole life. And I think if you talk to a lot of artists or cartoonists, it's something that, like, as you age, we all kind of find those like keystone things in our lives that we always keep coming back to. Is it bicycling? Is it running? Is it camping? Is it playing a certain? Is it playing chess? Is it knitting? Is it whatever? And drawing is one of those things that, like, even if I get to a point where I'm frustrated, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is really irritating. A couple weeks go by and it's like I'm back drawing something again. And I think it for me has always gone hand in hand with that issue of, yeah, like self-expression, where you can't, maybe it's easier to express a feeling or emotion or something that's happened in a drawing versus trying to find the right words to describe it.
Mhm.
With a drawing, you can just, like, here's a silly thing that happened to me, and you can be expressive and also have fun at the same time. And so for me, that's, I think, what's always just been kind of relieving about it. And when you work on larger projects like this, there's also kind of the I don't know, monastic isn't maybe the right word, but like there's a lot of, especially when you're like inking, it's almost like meditation, where you
Mhm.
just kind of, some of the lines are already there. You don't have to do a lot of thinking. You kind of zone out. You put some music on, a podcast, whatever, and it just kind of, like, the only thing that matters is the lines that you're putting down on the paper, and it just, like, kind of, you know, everything else in the world just kind of fades away, which is a great feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Love that. Well, you have the new book on the way. You have Button
Mhm.
Pusher that's out and other works as well. If I'm a listener out there and I want to find out more, where would be some places I might go?
Sure. So my primary website is stylishvittles.com. That's the word stylish, and then vittles is like old-timey food, stylishvittles.com.
Hmm.
Um, that's my main, like, where everything kind of points to. I'm also on Instagram as Tyler Page 12. I'm on Twitter as Tyler Page. Those are the primary places online where I post information or hang out or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Well, well, I am a fan. As I mentioned, I was very glad to see Extra Large on the way and excited to see what's next. And you no doubt have something that's in the works even as we speak, I'm sure.
Sort of. I've got a few things cooking. After
Yeah.
I finished Extra Large, like I kind of alluded to at the beginning, it was I needed to work on some smaller, simpler things. So they might turn into something. They might just end up being, doodles in a sketchbook for now. But I mean, that's kind of the ever-present challenge as a writer and cartoonist, is figuring out or waiting for that one spark or seed to, turn into something. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, glad to have you back anytime, and many thanks for a wonderful second talk as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
Anytime, anytime.